Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hazik, and I am one of the younger delegates for FutureTalk. So I actually run a social enterprise that helps rural communities succeed. And the reason being why I'm here today is because I myself am very passionate in inequality. So growing up for the past 24 years of my life in Singapore, I have been exposed to various forms of inequality, especially in a country that prides itself as a young country that transitioned from a third world to first world. I never thought that poverty existed in my country. I never thought that is homelessness. But when I was 16, I make friend with a young boy. He was an orphan, and at the age of 15, he had no access to education. He was homeless, and at the same time, it's not because he chose to be homeless, but because he was not presented with any opportunity. He had short-term memory loss, and he does not have any control of his right arm and right leg. And when I was 20 years old, I was conscripted into the military service, and that is when I understand and learned about racial privilege within my own country. And when I was 22, I actually spent 1 year traveling around India. And when I was traveling around India, I experienced different form of inequality. Inequality beyond nation-state boundary. For the very first time in my life, I actually saw a young child at the age of 5 years old digging through heaps of garbage only to eat a half-rotten apple out of desperation and hunger. So the past few years of my life, I decided to commit myself to solve inequality, and I realized that this is actually a very complex problem, a wicked problem that cannot be solved in silo. And for our talk today, we actually have three distinguished speakers to talk about inequality, and the first of which I would like to introduce Tinna. So Tinna has been working, and she actually co-founded her organization. So she founded Move the Elephant for Inclusiveness to promote inclusiveness through innovation enablers. So she's also a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and is a co-chair of the Global Future Council on Behavioral Sciences. So without further ado, let me invite Tinna on stage. Thank you.
So I want to take you on my personal journey of how I changed my approach fundamentally in how to achieve equality and inclusiveness. This is back in 2011. I'm presenting a long-term strategy for the executive management team. And this strategy is about how we can develop this multinational corporation into being an inclusive organization with equal opportunities to contribute and advance, with no discrimination, no harassment, and where we, in a natural way, leverage diversity for more innovation, better performance, well-being, and agility, and actually just future-proof this organization in a volatile market. So I had been given 45 minutes, and if you've been at an executive team meeting, you know that is a long time. Normally you get 10. If you're lucky, you get 5 minutes. But we're actually 15 minutes in, and I'm thinking this is actually going quite well, because I actually managed to get them to talk about unconscious bias, which was not a natural thing in 2011. It's become like a global fancy trend today to discuss cognitive biases. And the vice president, he's like, this is really interesting. I've never heard about this before. So really that explains a lot of why progress is so slow. And another vice president goes, I'm not biased. I mean, I would never hire a person because they have the same gender as me, the same skin color as me, communicate like me, have the same educational background like me, or are as tall as me. I hire the best qualified people, he says with conviction, as he is looking at the other 9 Caucasian white men in similar suits, same color even. And this is when the CEO goes, stop. And you also know there are different kinds of stops. There is the stop that is the excitement kind of stuff, the stop where it's about, oh, this is really new. This is novel. Let's just pause for a moment and explore this further. Those happen, but they're not often. Then there is the kind of stop where it's more like, A little bit of skepticism, like, okay, let's get some evidence here, some more examples, something we can benchmark ourselves against the other companies, what are the others doing? Those happen often. And then there's a stop where it's like just full stop. We don't want to hear anything more. Pack up your stuff and just leave. They never really happen. But this stop was a full stop. He literally asked me to pack up my stuff and stop the presentation. And he goes like this, because what he said next fundamentally changed how I work. He says, we don't want to understand this intellectually. This is simply too complex. We believe in this with our hearts. We are ready to run. And if you could just get the other 16,000 to move as well, we'd be fine. That's it. So it's needless to say that I'm in a state of panic at this time. I pack up my stuff. And I turn around the door and I say, I just need to understand my mandate. You want me to get 16,000 people moving, but you don't want me to talk to them and tell them why they're running or where they're running to? And he says, yes. And I say, well, then it can take a long time before we meet at the destination. That's okay, he says. Changes like this takes a long time. So I leave, and I'm in a lot of pain. First of all, I start doubting if I'm even qualified to do this work, even though I worked with this for about 10 years at the time. And I also feel really ashamed, I feel really embarrassed, and I feel also disrespected. So one thing that works fine, and psychologists actually have a word for this, they call it discharge of pain, which is when you start telling people about it, because shame can't eat you up within if you put words on it. That was not a strategy. It was literally just, I just needed to kind of let some steam out. So I talked to some trusted peers about this, and I shared with them this experience, and they would go like, what an ass. How disrespectful. I mean, how are you even going to work in this company? You just pack your stuff and leave. And I'm like, I needed that kind of support. But then one day I was sharing it with somebody I'm not close to. I didn't really know her, but I just trusted her. And I shared this story with her, and she goes, wow. And I go, And she goes, that is possibly the biggest mandate you are ever going to get. And she looked at me and she said, so, what are you going to do about it? And that literally made me wake up. And it made me start searching for other ways to do this. If my job was not to convince people with rational arguments and business cases and all the data that was available, but it was a completely different way of making these kind of changes and get 16,000 people moving. So the same exact week, I was reading a book, and I came across this brain analogy by psychologist Jonathan Haidt. And he was talking about the two brain systems we have. So I already knew a lot about the two brain systems, because I'm an anthropologist, I've studied psychology. I knew that we have two systems in our brain, two modes of thinking. We have the rational mind, and we have the unconscious mind. So the unconscious mind are where all the cognitive biases are. These are really driven by instinct and like a flash of effect kind of reactions. This is not something we really control. This just happens. It's irrational, it's emotional, it's associative. And the rational mind is the mind, that's self-reflective and can process complex information. So Jonathan Haidt, he says, these two brain systems are really like a 6-ton heavy elephant and its tiny rider. The tiny rider, by getting the business case and why it's important to be more, ensure equality, equal opportunities, diversity, and inclusion, and so on, can really just by getting this, can direct us in the right direction if it makes sense. But it's not the brain doing the behavior. The brain system doing the behavior is the 6-ton heavy elephant. And so all the bricks in the puzzle really came together for me at this time, because this image is really important because it illustrates how big an influence these two brain systems have on our behavior and our decision making. And I realized that for the past 10 years, I had been speaking or talking to the wrong brain system, and I had been speaking the wrong language. Because whenever I was talking about equality, diversity, inclusiveness, it triggered all the wrong associations in this system. It triggered the loss aversion bias, fear of losing privileges, fear of losing power, fear of being blamed for this inequality and so on. So it literally triggered all the wrong associations, which was the worst possible thing you could trigger if you want to achieve this. So that day I made a pledge to myself. I made a pledge which was, I will never again present one single business case. I will only focus my attention on moving the elephant for inclusiveness. And so I did. And I looked back, and I looked for all the ways that I had actually appealed to the elephant. There wasn't much. There was only about 20% of the time I'd actually done my work well. So I also realized that I hadn't actually made any impact for 10 years, which just added to the pain of the CEO experience. So I also think pain is good. Doubt is good. It can actually move us as change makers. Or maybe that's the story I needed to tell myself. But what I started doing was I started designing, based on behavioral insights, designing inclusiveness and equality to be the default. Not a nice to have if we have time or kind of feel like it, but something that is just the norm. That requires that we redesign the organizational processes. And so how do you do that in an organization? So I started applying behavioral economics and nudging. And nudging is what Richard Thaler defines as choice architecture. It is really when you design the environment or the process or the way you talk, your messages, in a way that alters people's behavior in a predictable direction. You're not harming people, and you're not taking choice and options away from them. So I merged those insights with my insights from anthropology and psychology, and I merged it with my long-term insights from all the challenges we're facing in terms of inclusion, diversity, equality, and so on. So just to give you an example, to kind of get everybody on board, like nudging for, say, organ donation. If a country asks their citizens, would you want to donate your organs, it matters what the default is, because those countries where they ask people to opt into the system, they don't have a lot of citizens in the system, even though about 80 to 90% say, yes, I would love to, but only 12 to 20% actually come about to doing it, because it's complex to opt in on something that has to do with your own death. Whether those countries that flip the default design it so we already signed you up according to your intentions, you can just opt out. It is equally complex to opt out. That means you get people to do what they intend to do, but you don't take away the choice for them. So I took that example, and then I merged it with a lot of problems that we have in terms of equal opportunities to advance in an organization. Because the majority of these conversations go like this: who is ready for more responsibility, or to be the project manager of that prestigious innovation project? Who is ready to do this? Who's ready to do that? And then the brain goes into, because the elephant is driven by patterns. It will look for similar patterns. It will look for something it recognizes. Like, so the brain will literally go look for people who look like the people who already did a good job. That means we keep producing homogeneity. So, but if you flip the default, instead of say who's ready, then you say everybody in this team is ready, or every student is equally good, or they're just as smart, or they're just as competent, or all the ideas in this pitch session was equally brilliant. Now you have to ask the question, why not? Instead of why, because your brain goes into confirmation bias. Why not? And why. But you have to do that for every person or every idea. This totally, changing the default like that, totally changed how the leaders in this organization were making their choices. Because it's difficult to opt in on somebody who's different, but it's equally difficult to opt out on a good idea if you already said it was good. Does it make sense? Okay. You can redesign the systems too by making sure everybody's anonymous when they pitch an idea, when they apply for a job, or when they share codes on an open innovation platform on the internet. It matters that people can see the names, the identity data of the person. It triggers all the biases we don't want to trigger if we want equality and more inclusiveness. So removing all the information about people has a huge impact too. So this is how we can design our way out of it. But there's another way I realized that worked much better if you want to motivate people or get people to buy in on something, or you want them to see something they cannot see. Because the majority of people who are in a privileged position can't see the inequality, and that's why it's so damn difficult to change it. So I want to give you an example of how you can do this. So a couple of months later, I'm invited back in by the executives. And it goes like this. If you could just kind of bring in a PowerPoint slides, a business case, and a one-pager on some of the stuff on unacceptable behavior and harassment. And if you've been in my shoes, you know that you'd be shot dead as a messenger when you bring that one in, even though they asked for this themselves. So I said to myself, I'll be damned, I am not going in there to be shot as a messenger. So what I did instead was, it's not like I had anything to lose. I was like a complete failure anyway, so I could just kind of either just give up, quit my job, get fired, or just be a complete failure again. So I was just like, whoa, freedom. I take advantage of that freedom. So I collect examples from 40, 50 people in the organization who had experienced this kind of behavior. And I wrote their stories for them in first-person quotes, and I printed them out in big speech bubbles. I can tell you it was quite painful for me to go through this process, and that was a pain I needed to trigger in the executives as well. As they entered the room of this executive conference room, I had decorated the entire room with speech bubbles. And they came in and I said, you don't have to sit down. Your people have something to tell you. In that exact moment, I'm no longer the messenger. The people are the messenger. That is a behavioral design as well. Who's your messenger is extremely important if you want to foster inclusiveness and equality. So they started reading these, and I thought to myself, if they just read a couple of, maybe 3 to 4, I'd be happy. They read all 40. And at no point did they look at me. They talked to each other. And I've never heard such silence as they were reading these. And when they were speaking about emotions. I don't know about you, but there are not a lot of senior leaders who are speaking about emotions in their workplace, because it is not a part of the norm. But they were talking about emotions like, I feel so sad that this is going on. I cannot even begin to imagine how it must feel to be exposed to this every day. I feel disgusted. I'm really, really angry. I feel nauseated. And that is not a figure of speech. Because what this does when we expose people to the voices of people who feel pain, excluded, discriminated, harassed, and not treated right, it triggers the part of the brain where our physical pain is and where empathy is. And this is where the motivation really lies to want to change this. And another thing I did was I presented them with data, but not to their rational mind, but to the elephant, to the emotions, to do exactly what the CEO had asked me. Don't talk to our brain, talk to our hearts, and make those legs move. So that's exactly what I did. I showed them data that illustrates that if a person experiences this kind of behavior, they lose 30% of their decision-making power. If one person in a team of 8 experiences this kind of behavior, they influence the productivity of the entire team, so it drops by 12.5%. I presented this to trigger the loss aversion bias. Instead of triggering the loss aversion bias in terms of freaking out, I'm losing privileges, I'm losing my power, I'm losing a slice of the cake, this one triggered the loss aversion bias with, damn, we're losing performance and productivity and innovation and all this stuff that is really painful with the frame of reference that these people had. And there were other things we did, but one other thing in terms of applying behavioral insights to create this kind of change is don't overburden the system with information and knowledge. There was at least 20 things we needed to fix, but I just presented 2 of them. And that left an openness in their mind to see other opportunities. And they looked at each other and said, well, today we can all do something. At least we can make sure that this intervention goes on a tour in the entire organization, because we need everybody to feel this. I don't want a spreadsheet. I don't want PowerPoint slides. I just want people to feel this. And also, I want to make sure that every team meeting in this organization, this is on top of the agenda, because already we are talking about physical safe work environment. We need to talk about mentally safe work environment as well. So if you can get people to just kind of add it to a part of what they're already doing, we're going to be on the move really, really fast with this. So I set out to, I created this nonprofit organization called Move the Elephant for Inclusiveness to empower as many people and organizations as possible to do this. All walks of life, all professions, because I really believe everybody can learn how to do this as a basic skill. And to help people apply this in an easy manner, I also founded this nonprofit called Inclusion Nudges, because we call this nudging for inclusion. So we now have 100 examples of how to do this, and it's open source, and we're just setting it free, because we really, really, truly believe that if we should have as many people to do this, it needs to be really, really easy to do it. So today we have young entrepreneurs in Kakuma refugee camp using exactly that speech bubble example to reduce conflict between the clans. So that gives me hope that if we just share the tiniest things that are working in terms of applying behavioral science, we can all make a huge difference without having to be shot as the messenger. So just want to invite you to take a look and also share. So thank you for your attention.